Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Junia Doan. Thank you for joining me for today's program of Junia Doan's The Spark. My guest is Dr. Michael Gavin, the president of Delta College. Welcome, Dr. Gavin. So, what are the responsibilities of a president, specifically the president of Delta College?
Oh, that's a big question in a lot of ways. I think a president's responsibility are generally to make sure that the institution is thriving and healthy. I think at Delta College, it's a little more of the desire to situate Delta College in a national landscape as being a leader in innovation. Being part of the League of Innovation, one of 16 colleges that is on a board seat for the League of Innovation, means that the other 1,500 plus community colleges do look to us for solutions to solving whatever the day's problems are. For me, I think it's a very simple responsibility in terms of how to focus that work, which is, you've probably heard me say many times, but increase our completion rate and numbers for students in equitable ways. But how to do that is sort of the magic, and where I think my responsibility lies within setting those goals and letting the people have the autonomy internally to innovate and think about ways to figure out why students aren't graduating at the rates we want them to, and thinking about new ways of educating as a result. So a lot of my responsibility is national landscape and then getting out of the way of the innovators, if you will.
So what do the innovators do? What are they thinking about, and what are they looking to expand the offerings?
Yeah, some of it's expanding the offerings, and then right before we started taping this, you and I were talking about the smaller things being the big things. I think that some of the faculty here are doing a really good job, and our other staff are doing a good job of thinking about what the barriers are for students in the educational experience they have. And a lot of it is actually outside of the classroom. So some of the ways that our academic sides are thinking about it are shortening the traditional schedule for a class from 15 weeks to 7 weeks, because there's a lot less life that can happen in 7 weeks than in 15. So students might be able to make it through a 7-week course, get the same rigor and content, but not necessarily have a car breakdown, sacrifice their entire semester's work, if you will. So there's a lot of thinking about delivery of education in different ways in order to fit the lives of students rather than the other way around.
What is the role of a professor, a tenured professor now, to the students? What has it been, and what do you see it as?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting question. So I was a tenured professor too.
Yes,
so,
for a long time.
Yeah. Obviously, it's to maintain the rigor within the classroom, but I think one thing that we've seen shift a lot, especially in the last, I would say the pandemic enhanced, but did not necessarily create the notion that professors, especially at a community college, need to establish more one-on-one relationships with students in the context of the classroom. And it's not just thinking about research and teaching a class and then going to your office. It's more thinking about the student as a whole and how a community college professor can deliver content, but also see those students that are in their classroom as fully human beings that have lives beyond the classroom, and engaging with them in ways that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that's really not the way that we were operating, if you will.
So would you call that a social work orientation?
Almost, yeah. And I think the future of community colleges will be one where all of the services that a student might need will, at least in a minute scale, be offered on a community college campus. Whether it's food, clothing, to your point, social work, mental health, all of that will have to be at least have resources on community college campus so that students don't have to go 4 or 5 different places in order to get what they need. So, yeah,
And
I
then
think
what
I'm
about
encouraging.
adjunct professors?
Same thing, really. So,
Really?
yeah, I
Yeah.
do think so. I think that the difference between a full-time and an adjunct professor in terms of responsibility would be the scale of whether they're working on 4 or 5 different committees or not,
I see.
publishing, professional development at the same scale. I think that's pretty much the difference, but the expectation that they're looking at a student as a whole human being rather than just the academic part of their life is where all community college employees, not just professors, need to be in terms of seeing
Do
their
you
success.
have the students rate the professor? Sometimes.
We do. Yep.
Do you take them seriously or not so seriously, or?
We take them seriously. I think there's also the caveat. I'm being an academic,
Right.
would be looking at it differently than somebody who's in a
Yes.
different aspect of the college. Recognize though that some students might rate a professor poorly because they had a hard class, and a
Right.
couple years from now might look back and that same student might say that
Grateful.
professor, with some gratitude. And there's also some sort of biases that we're very aware of that students, literature has shown that students may have in terms of how they rate certain gender or race of a professor. So I take them seriously, but I also try to look at them as part of a whole rather than, speaking all the truth, as I would with any piece of data.
Are you aiming to raise standards for the moment, or is that second tier goal following the ones you just mentioned?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our standards are pretty high here. So,
Okay.
and I wouldn't say that we need to do anything with the standards that we have. It's more of thinking about ways in which we can ensure that all students are passing at the same rate as others. We have at the aggregate level. I can talk data all day, by the way. But at the aggregate level, our students are passing about 80% in all classes, and our learning outcomes show that they're learning very well. But we do have what I call opportunity gaps among different genders and races that we need to adjust potentially how we teach and or the curriculum we teach in order to make sure that all students succeed at this open access institution.
What is the role of culture in this issue?
I think it's primary, actually.
Primary.
Yeah. So one of the things that I hope to have brought and continue to work on is the culture of the institution as being the primary way in which we have those metrics met. Rather than have the metrics be the journey, it's the culture that's the journey, if you will. Students need to feel like they belong on campus. Like all students need to feel like they belong on campus. And that's not necessarily how any institution has operated throughout the history of higher ed in America. So there's some things that we need to do in order to make sure that we adjust our ways of being on
I
campus.
hear you.
And same thing for our employees. We need to adjust so that all of our employees feel like they belong. And culture is much harder to change than
Challenge.
metrics.
What did you learn in teaching that could be done better that you're using now?
It's I actually thought I was a pretty good professor.
Good. I'd like to hear that.
It's actually more of an administrator that I've learned, I think. In about the last decade in higher ed has really focused on, and I'm a very data-centric person, but it's focused on data, and it's focused on ensuring that almost transactions are very easy for students. So we make the application real easy, make sure they know the courses they have to take, make sure that there's no courses they take off plan. That's sort of where the focus of higher ed has been for the mandate orientation, that they check in with an advisor. And I would say through my failures, I've seen successful metrics at the end of the day with some of the work that I've done, but I've also seen, if I'm making this up as an example, mind you, but if you mandate that a student has to go to an orientation, but the orientation's no good,
Yeah.
or the advisor that they're seeing is not a nice person, there's no point to mandating it. So I really started to question the direction of higher ed in focusing on what I would call transactional relationships instead of really getting, people use the term transformational. I really just talk about it. It's like they're a human being you're talking to. Get to know them. And ensure that the student feels comfortable enough that they can be on campus, because we've already succeeded in the academic part. What we need to succeed in is knowing them well enough that they can feel comfortable in saying, I need help with $50 because my tire just got blown out. Most people don't feel comfortable saying, I need
Ever.
help. Right. So that's a person and mindset change that we need to act with in higher ed to respond to what could be considered a crisis in terms of learning in the higher ed landscape, if you will.
Do you see a role for asking for students to think about what is the good life? So they can answer, well, I want to get an education, I want to get a job, I want to support, to think of themselves, I don't want to say as functioning adults, but wider than just passing the class. So maybe they're philosophers or one way or another, so they can deal with their inner life, their outer life, their relationship life.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm answering this question, but it's funny you said that. So when I used to teach, there was a Mark Strand. You know Mark Strand at all? Poet from.
No, but tell me.
Really, my favorite poet. He wrote a poem called "The Good Life," and the end of it says something to the effect of, "The good life wanders the climes of despair. You look around and then you are there," or something to that effect. And the whole point is, like, you could be living the good life without even knowing it. Right? Like, I used to use the metaphor of, do you feel different on your 16th birthday? Not really. You know?
Right.
So it's so easy to miss the fact that you could be living the good life if you just took a moment, right? So I think that's the kind of lesson that would be really helpful for us in higher ed to take a minute to teach our students, that the good life is not necessarily only economic,
Yes.
that it is a values-based living, if you will. And you should find your passion, right? It's okay to take an extra couple classes if, you know, you wanted to be a nurse, but now you discovered you love philosophy. That's worth 6 credits for a lifetime in order to be happy. You know, those are the kinds of things that higher ed's missed in the last decade, I think. In thinking about value beyond the living that you can make. It can also be, like we were talking about earlier, you can be happy and not be making 6 figures. It's possible.
Absolutely.
You know? Maybe you'll make way beyond 6 figures because you're happy.
Yeah. Yes. So I've been thinking about this because I think part of education is to ask questions, for the student to ask questions. I can't think of a thing in my life that was new that I wasn't scared of in the beginning.
Very true. Yeah.
So it isn't the fact that they are from somewhere. I just think new is both an opportunity and a challenge.
Yep.
And you just have to take it on. I've reached a point about I've had so many bad things happen in my life. When I hit one of those periods, I just say, here we are again.
Yeah.
Got to deal.
That's right.
But in my young part of my life, I thought, oh my God, I'm the only one in the world with this kind of thing. And I think there's an advantage to living through cycles. And I don't know that it's the role of Delta to teach that necessarily, but I do think the chance to persevere, right, to provide, to see yourself as just got to handle here, got to find a way through this.
Yeah.
And because sometimes motivation gets killed if you get overwhelmed by the studies or overwhelmed by anything.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do that. You can get help, as like you say.
Well, and to your point, you know, hardship in life is common. I mean, everybody has those kinds of obstacles. And from my perspective, my hardships have been through, the way I've gotten through them is through connection, right? I only say that after, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that 10 years ago, right? But if you have a college that allows that kind of connection, you can at least get the people through that obstacle, right? With our students who are 60% first generation, you know,
Yeah.
every little obstacle that they face tells them what they already believe sometimes, that this is not
Yes.
for me. So how can we as an institution move towards having an environment where we can connect with them to help them understand that college is for them? Like,
Not only that,
those are the
but
questions that we need to move
America
towards, you know?
offers a lot of choice because we
Yeah.
have freedom and they have responsibilities to do their best, not only for themselves and family. This is my bias.
Yeah.
but because of the country needs them
Yeah.
to be,
No doubt
be
about it.
good at education. We've got challenges from other countries, and our people, we're going to depend on these next generations to get themselves educated and full of confidence to handle
Yeah,
things in their time.
That's actually one of the things I get, I would say concerned about. I was trying to find the right verb there, is that to me, this moment in time that we're in is one where higher education, community colleges specifically, are part of the solution to some of the nastiness that we're seeing out there.
Yes.
And if there's not a way to get those students through, it bodes very poorly for the generations in the future and for democracy in general. So I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that we in community colleges especially play a significant role, in higher ed in general too. You know.
Oh, interesting. And how are you going to do that?
I don't know that Delta will be the only one, right? But I do
Yes.
think the institutions of education in general are faced with a moment where there are a lot of people out there who would prefer a less educated public. And I think that there are people.
Really? I'm surprised. But, well, because education, if you study the right things, are the key to opportunity often.
Mm-hmm.
So you would want to multiply your chances of opportunity by getting
Yep.
trained in some, and I like your emphasis on the trades too. I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was quite novel.
Yep, I mean, you can make a really good living being in any number of the trades that we teach here. And that's also like part of the discourse that is out in America in general, is a lot of families out there don't necessarily believe that going into the trades is a worthy profession. A lot of those trades make a lot of good money over time.
And they're artists, and they're solving
I
problems for
love
people.
That. They are artists a lot.
They are.
Yeah, yeah. There was a gentleman I met who called him craftsmen, and
Yes.
it's very true. You know, it's not. It's something I could not do, but I have. When you see it up front, you can see the artistry in a lot of the work that goes.
I think Napoleon was talking about, no matter what, whether the horseshoe, he wanted the best in their field because we needed everybody.
I like that. I didn't know that.
Yes, that
like
is
that.
true. How did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Evanston, right outside of Chicago, north side of Chicago. Had a great upbringing, and
Tell us about it.
well, the story I like to tell, and it sort of aligns with what I perceive myself as today, is I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, very diverse area, and in the educational system, it was very diverse as well. I was played football, baseball, basketball, all the way through high school. Really wanted to be an athlete, but I just wasn't good enough to make it past high school. And the thing that has stuck with me throughout, the common element from kindergarten all the way to today that has stuck with me, is that when I was going through all the way K through, I guess it would have been 8, my classrooms were very diverse. The sports teams were very diverse, but by high school, we were tracked in such a way that the diversity did not stay in the classroom. So I was in honors classes, mainly white, middle, and upper class students, whereas the Hispanic and African American were not in those classes anymore, but we played sports together still. And then I went to college on a scholarship and also was mainly in white classrooms there. And so what I saw was how the educational system mirrored the housing system in Evanston, which was also segregated, though it was considered to be one of the more liberal areas in the country.
Yeah.
And it probably is still, but there's what I could see though is that there's a way that power and race and class reproduce themselves through the educational system, if you let it. But there's also the ability for a more socially just enterprise to exist as a result of open access education and getting people into
I'm not
middle-class
exactly
jobs.
following. So in your high school, they track people. So by ability
Grades.
and willing to work, right? Not race.
But the outcome was racial.
So looking at it, do you think you would say the Hispanic or whoever was black, who was ever in the group, needed more coaching or more studying, or what?
I think I would put it more that there was like the literature even today would say that those individuals would not necessarily have to be tracked into different classrooms. We could have been mainstreamed, if you will, so everybody was in the same classroom and had extra support outside the classroom, tutoring. There probably was also a lot of hunger issues, which is why they didn't perform well on the high stakes tests, which doesn't necessarily mean that they were academically unprepared. It's just that, again, back to the same comments I was making earlier, is there's reasons that people don't perform well on tests that are high stakes. It's partially that they didn't get enough sleep the night before, because there's dogs barking in the backyard. There's hunger issues, mental health problems, et cetera. It's not academic necessarily all the time.
Do you know anything about Elon Musk's school for his children and other employee children?
Only from headlines. I haven't really gotten into the...
I looked it up,
reading,
and they put everyone in the same classroom, and they don't really teach them things. They ask them to solve problems in a general way, and then they have to learn whatever they need to take the next step in the problem. Is that approach useful, or can't be done on a big group setting, or?
I would love to see that go, like that concept, without getting into the details, but
yes.
I would love to see that be part of the innovation at Delta, actually. So focus on the learning, right? Not the number of hours you're in a seat.
Yeah.
Not thinking about all the competencies that one learns in a project, if you will.
Right.
And giving credit towards that rather than, you took you 2 years to get a degree. What we care about is if you learned.
I actually looked up this school.
Yeah.
Because I thought, well, he'll probably have a different approach. And they now have, I can't call it a club, but it's a way to figure out how they share their information and how they do things.
Okay.
Well, I couldn't do very much with that in my life, but someone can. So later I'll tell you that, and in case someone in innovation wants to look it up and do something, who knows, maybe get a better idea.
Yeah, I love that.
That's what makes humans great. They're so smart.
That's right. That's right. The more of them around each area,
Yes,
so
they are.
The more you're thinking
What
about
were the values of your parents? What did they insist you do or act or learn?
Mainly be polite, honestly. Very hard work ethic. And they were both very committed to social justice as well. So one of the things that I did from kindergarten through high school is every Tuesday we were working at a soup kitchen. My family ran it, and I think from that, I learned, I think that sort of goes back to this hierarchy of needs that I keep talking to, is if you're hungry, you're no
think
good,
of anything
right?
else.
So,
no, it's true.
And a lot of people are hungry. A lot of people, the basic needs of our students are often what is getting in the way. And it's not like I may be a bleeding heart, but at the same time, it's also very concrete and realistic. If you're hungry, you're not going to do well on the test. So, what I'd really like to prefer to do with our, back to I learned that through my upbringing, but I also see it in our data from our students is a lot of them are food insecure. Some are homeless. Some are single parents. These are the stresses that get in the way of learning.
Can, I don't want to call them teenagers, but whatever, late teenagers, can they be taught to work hard if that's a new concept for them?
I don't know the answer to that question. It's one of those that I think that I don't know that you can teach it. I think you almost learn it through life experience. Unless it came from your family. Another part of my story is I went to college. I did not do well my freshman year. What it took me was my dad saying he wasn't going to help pay the bills along with the scholarship anymore unless I did well, and went back and got my work ethic back. I think a lot of our adult students, take a case example, they go bag groceries for a couple years, and this isn't the life they wanted, and so they'll work hard academically to get where they want. Sometimes it's life experience has to slap you a little bit.
Interesting. I think the working hard continuously is one of the big skills you need.
Well, yeah.
To get anything completed.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you sat down with me, because I now have confidence The trick is, what is the time, and what is the role of Zoom in this?
You know, I think it's like with anything, and this is after having thought about it deeply for a year and a half now, that, you know, is all in moderation, right? It's hard to have good connection with people on Zoom. It's hard to innovate and be creative with people on Zoom. At the same time, for our ability to be like talking to somebody, and I was talking to somebody earlier today in San Francisco without having to travel. That's invaluable. And I do think that it's invaluable also to be able to teach students who are adults, for instance, at 10 p.m. when they're after they're putting their kids to bed. But I don't think it's a panacea. I really think it's all in moderation and thinking about circumstance and context, and not relying on technology to substitute for human interaction is going to be a key for a successful institution.
Thank you, Dr. Gavin. So, we have learned a great deal. One here is a passionate man about improving educational outcomes for the greatest number of children who come to Delta. They have about a 50% retention rate, and he wants to run that up to 100 by making things easier in a lot of ways. This comes from his family, in a sense, who told him to be polite and made him go to a soup kitchen. So he saw early on that not everybody has the same good luck as he did. So as you go in your life, remember, do something kind for someone you know and someone you don't know every single day. Come back next week and always be optimistic. It's a gift you give yourself and others. Without optimism, you're less powerful. Power is just the incentive to do it, and doing it requires hard work, even if you're scared, as we talked about earlier. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadownsthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadownthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.